Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. I am your host, Todd Embley, and I am thrilled to be joined by Claire Urry, Chief Commercial Officer at the China-Britain Business Council. Today, we're going to talk about her recent trip to Shanghai, developments in the UK-China business relations, and opportunities for British businesses in China. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you, Todd.
So, Claire, where are you that we're recording you from today?
Well, I'm in a small place called Horncastle in the county of Lincolnshire in the UK, in England.
So Horncastle.
Horncastle, yeah.
Horncastle. So it's not like Hong Kong.
No, it's not. It's Horncastle. And it's like many of the cities that we might touch on. Nobody will have heard of them.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's start by talking about your career working at that nexus of the China-UK trade.
Sure. Well, I mean, perhaps first I can say, I first became involved in all things China when I studied Mandarin at Leeds University in Yorkshire, and then Fudan University in Shanghai. That was a long time ago, longer than I care to think about. And I joined China-Britain Business Council and its predecessor organisation in the mid-1990s when I was responsible for organising trade delegations of British businesses out to China. And at that time, sort of in the first decade, I really covered a range of sectors from retail, general exports, healthcare, financial and professional services, which are some of the sectors where we were seeing growth at the time. But then after that, I moved on to cover more specifically agriculture, agri-tech, food and drink. And that's when we really started taking groups out to some of the bigger trade fairs in China, like FHC, which I know we're going to touch on a little bit later. But now my current role involves leading our team of bilingual advisors and researchers and specialists in delivering a range of services and support to British companies to help them understand the ever-changing growth opportunities and challenges that China presents for them. But across that whole time, so I've been there nearly 30 years. Some people groan when I say that, but across that time, it's just been really fascinating to see firsthand the development of China and how it's evolved since those early days when I was in Shanghai in the mid-80s to the city that I saw a couple of weeks ago when I went back. But also to work with, many numbers of highly passionate and innovative companies who've wanted to launch themselves into the market and grow their businesses.
Okay. It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned how fascinating it is to work there. So when I used to run that investment accelerator for tech startups in China, and we had this methodology or this ethos at the fund of wanting to always dive deep into sectors. We wanted to be very, very big on synthetic biology or hardware. And then people would question what we were doing at China Accelerator. And I would say, well, China as a geography is our sector because it's changing so fast. It was so unique and so poorly understood. That was what made it so fascinating as far as where we could take companies to grow. And that's what we were doing. And you're right, it has changed so much. I think some people get into fascinating fields. We're just in fascinating geographies, which is Indeed. Just as exciting, right?
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you just got back from a trip to Shanghai. You were there for the CIIE and FHC. Tell us about your impressions of the city post-COVID.
Yeah. Well, so this was my first visit back almost to the day in 4 years. So having been to China pretty much every year since I was 19, it was probably the longest gap that I'd had in not going back. So it was really good to be back, not least to meet up with colleagues and clients, but just to see how China. And I should say, I only stayed in Shanghai on this visit because we had a really hectic program for 10 days. But how China's continued to evolve despite being closed during the pandemic, and I think there is.
For those only listening, she just air quoted that.
Yeah, sorry. they say that innovation is born out of adversity, don't they? So anyone who knows China will know exactly that China has continued to innovate during that period. It certainly hasn't stood still, and China has not been closed. We might not have been able to go, but boy, has it carried on evolving, and it's really accelerated, I think, some of the areas that some of our clients and our businesses are involved in. What did I think of Shanghai? I've always loved the city. I guess it's kind of, my home in China. But I really feel now it's truly a modern, future-facing city. Electric cars are everywhere. It's got a really sophisticated retail scene. We were obviously there with a group of food and drink companies, so that was my real focus. But that's supported by advanced e-commerce, fantastic infrastructure and ever-curious consumers. I mean, the city's, well, it's very, it sort of struck me that it was very quiet, and I realised it's because all the cars are electric vehicles. Or mopeds delivering e-commerce parcels. And I happened to coincide with, 11/11 Singles Day. So there were a lot of them around.
I bet. Yeah, that infrastructure of logistics is, I touch on it here and there. Regular listeners will know how much I just am such a fan of the logistics there. And both within the city and from city to city, it's absolutely fabulous. You're right. I mean, there's just the mopeds are zooming all over the place, and it's just fun to watch. You just feel like, it's Black Friday every day, or something like that. It's super cool. Now, specifically though, what was Britain's presence like at the CIIE and FHC, and why? Given that I think you're probably going to say it was a strong presence, why is participating in these events so important for the CBBC and British businesses?
Yeah, good question. I think the two trade fairs that we're talking about, so China International Import-Export Fair, CIIE, and Food and Hospitality China, are two very different shows. So for me, I think this was the first time that the British had taken a stand at the FHC show for a number of years, for obvious reasons. It was a slightly smaller group exhibiting than in the past, but I think that's just companies. Some companies are just waiting to see, but there were other companies. So there were quite a few companies who were very keen to get out there and have meetings with existing distributors, existing clients, but also to understand how that market has evolved. How the consumer base has evolved. But there were also, in the groups that I was involved in, there were a number of companies that were new to market and really wanting to go and touch and feel and see and smell and see things, at first hand. And we delivered a range of programs for them. We did site visits, we did tour visits, introduced them to buyers, etc. And I think it's a really great platform for companies to enter the market and see what other markets are doing, what other countries are doing, the presence of other countries as well. And it was great that, we actually had a government delegation there as well, because we haven't had a few of those in a few years either. CIIE, I didn't have a lot of time to spend there, but I went for about half a day. And I think for me, that tends to be for companies who are more established already in the market, often, showcasing their latest products. But I did see some really big, impressive stands from some of our premium members, some of the big drinks brands like Diageo, some of the car manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover, really impressive stands alongside many of their international and increasingly domestic competitors.
Let me ask you, you talked about that itinerary of various things. If you're taking a new brand, new eyes, new company, taking them to China, maybe for the first time or second time, maybe something like that, what mix of kind of itinerary items based on like culture, sightseeing, factory visits, going to expos, how do you mix that up to give them the broad and correct impression and get them as integrated or immersed into China as possible?
So I think, key for us is really to spend quite a lot of time with the companies before they leave to understand what their expectations are of the market, whether they've got any experience in China already by accident, or maybe they've been approached by a distributor who says, we like your stuff, we'd like to import it, and help them understand whether that's the right, that isn't the only person they should talk to. They should use the opportunity to talk to a range of people and build a picture up, because I'm sure Todd, from your time in China, the more people you talk to, the better balance of a picture you can build. And you develop your skills for talking to people in new cultures as you have more conversations. So understanding what the client wants is key. And then generally day one, a briefing, introduction. I think we worked with some companies that as well on our briefing for the companies that were there, talking about the market, the local market for Shanghai, which is where we were for that visit rather. And then we took them out on a number of store visits. So food retailers, who are the big food retailers? Some that work only with distributors, some that have got big networks that buy direct. In the past, we've taken them to see some of the e-commerce platforms. So a mix of routes into market for them to get a feel. Some of the companies that we had can't actually sell direct to China yet because of the licensing rules. So they've got to sell through cross-border e-commerce. So helping to understand what options are open for them. And then on this visit, we spent a day at the trade fair. Obviously, those who were exhibiting were there for the duration, but those who weren't exhibiting, we sort of gave them a base on the UK stand, and then they could go off and look at, confectionery section or dairy section and just look at what their competitors are doing and do their own market research. And then we had a day where we did a bit like a speed dating, meet the buyer type thing. So we'd identified some buyers who were interested in having a conversation. So there was a mix really. And then the rest of the time we left for them to plan themselves, or they could either commission more services if they wanted to. And if they wanted to go to other cities, then we've got a network of offices across China. So we were able to facilitate that. But Shanghai's a big enough place to start.
Oh, yeah. You could spend months there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned many offices. Probably a good time maybe to have you explain what the CBBC is. I know that a lot of our listeners are starting to get very familiar with, what chambers and business councils are about. What is yours doing? What is yours about? And maybe paint a picture of the membership and tell us about the important work that you're doing.
Sure. So our tagline, what do we say? We're the UK's national business network promoting trade and investment with China, that in a nutshell. But we've actually been active since 1954. And since then, we've acted as the independent voice of business, located at the heart of everything that goes on with China, engaging across both countries in the majority of sectors and most regions. So we have a membership base, about 500 companies, and they range from some of the UK's leading, FTSE 100 companies, to some quite small, innovative tech companies, and some other sort of mid-large manufacturing companies across a range of sectors. So I think we feel we're uniquely positioned in the UK and in China to represent and serve our members' interests. And we've played an important role during the course of that almost 70 years now in helping to shape bilateral relations between the UK and China, because we've got close links with the UK government and devolved administrations here. We work closely with Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales as well, and the Chinese government at national, provincial and municipal level. And we have really strong relationships with the British embassies and consulates out in China, as well as the Chinese embassy here in the UK and the consulates across the UK as well. So we deliver a range of services. We run events, information, briefings, trade issues, etc.
Right. Being that conduit really for understanding and growth and trade. Yeah.
Yeah.
What sectors are really doing well for UK companies in China, and where is there potentially room for growth? And then let's be honest and touch a little bit on where some of the challenges are for some of the
Sure.
UK companies that are operating in China.
Yeah, so forgive me. There's a lot, so I've made a few notes, Todd. So if I'm
Excellent.
glancing down,
Thank
forgive
you.
me. I don't want to misappropriate anything. So, I mean, we've talked about China being so huge. There's pretty much scope for most areas with the right approach. I think we've just been looking at some new HM revenue and customs data from the UK government. So things that have been doing pretty well recently: jewelry, cosmetics, clothing. I think footwear grew 18% in the 4 quarters before Q2 this year. Food products, beverages, and I think we just see there's room for growth in every category. We had a company in Yorkshire not so long ago. We were talking to. They were selling jute boxes. You know, the traditional jute boxes that you see in diners.
Yeah, with the
Cho-
vinyl
Yeah,
records inside, and you punch the buttons to choose which record and which song.
yeah. China's become I think, their biggest export market. So who knew?
Awesome.
Which sectors is that sit in? So it's those kind of little stories that counterbalance the big stories
Hmm.
that make the news. I've got a bit more on consumer markets brands, but we might go into those in a minute. But I think the challenges, I think just that nervousness, it's a long way away. The cultural differences, we spend a lot of time. We have a whole course on cultural differences and looking at how that impacts how business is done in China.
Hmm.
And I think just the fact that China does need a wholly different approach to other markets. You can't just copy and paste your strategy from Europe or the States or North America into your China strategy. And it does need a lot of work and investment if you're looking to build brand recognition. So you just need to think carefully about what your strategy is. I think so, and that can be daunting for companies, particularly probably in the current global economic climate with raised energy prices. There's a lot of factors that I think are influencing companies' decisions about particularly investing in long haul markets at the moment.
Yeah. Where do you see a lot of potential for growth, specific to, the sectors that the UK is really strong in, have really great exports or really good global growth, and do you think that have a real opportunity over the coming years, say between now and 2025, 2026, to really grow maybe more than some of the others?
So I asked our business analyst what his perspective was on this, and he said pretty much every category. I think just because and that sounds a bit
It's not a
flippant, but
political show, we can be
no,
honest.
no, I know. I mean, you would think renewables with global war, that move there, but China's making great steps forward in that itself. So I think we need
Yeah.
to engage because we all need to
Hmm.
be on that
Hmm.
on that journey. But so I mean, my sort of area of focus, as I said, over the last 10 or so years, has really been in the food and drink sector. We are seeing growth. I think the biggest areas from the UK perspective are pork, seafood, and whiskey, basically.
Nice.
Everyone loves a good dram of whiskey, but with some of those sectors, they bring their own challenges because you need to negotiate market access for meat plants. There's obviously phytosanitary conditions, and once you've got the access, the next challenge is actually keeping it.
Mm.
COVID threw up a whole challenge around that with talk about cold food chain and whether the virus was you know going to pass through that. And so we've been working with a number of companies who sort of caught up in that difficult area, and that's
Well,
part of the area that we can help. We can help them to lobby the different government bodies and work with the British government to work on that.
the food and drink, I mean, that's an area that we have seen a really significant growth in tastes and preferences, haven't we? I mean, I
Absolutely.
remember now you have a much longer tenure in China than I do. And you'll remember that there was, I don't know how to say it, there wasn't that many options for what you were going to eat and drink.
No.
I also visited Shanghai in the late 80s on a trip. I spent
Yeah.
less than a week there, but it seemed like every restaurant and every meal was pretty much you were going to be met with the same thing, just variations of.
Yeah.
And they have really expanded their palettes on both food and drink. And
Yeah.
the explosion of, I mean, Subway sandwiches has been one of the most wildly successful fast food chains that now, because you can stand and see the ingredients and then choose which ones are going, like that met a cultural comfort level for
Yeah.
Chinese. They felt comfortable being able to see versus something that was happening in the back behind closed doors. And I know that played a big part in it. But basically, they were really wanting to go out and explore everything. It wasn't just baijiu and tea.
No.
They were expanding into wine and whiskeys. And
Yeah.
so I completely agree. I think in that area, and they're incredibly inquisitive and curious and
Absolutely.
really willing to try. So there is a ton of room to grow in that area. And I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, but I think also now, now and over the last decade, say, with the increase in use of mobile phones, social media, WeChat, everybody wants to talk about this more experiential side of their life. It's not a case of we're eating because we need to eat to function. It's about that whole experience. I mean, the amount of, I've got a friend from the US who's importing, he was the first person to import mezcal into China, and he works with a lot of the cocktail bars and running themed nights there, and some amazing restaurants, and no shortage, ran out of nights to visit all the places we wanted to go to. But I think it's part of that whole, Gen Z, millennial, wanting to explore, wanting to be, learn and do new things. And also, lots more Chinese students studying overseas, wanting to, have some of that same experience back when they get home, I guess, as well. So
one of the things I loved about Shanghai, and differentiate that between a New York or a London, is that you had this ceiling was as high as any of those other cities. There was a Michelin chef on every corner. But you know what else was on every corner? A little street vendor where you could get for 1 kwai, a skewer of something. And so the floor was also super low. You could live extremely cheap. I mean, if you were to go to New York as a startup, say, if from my world, you're looking at, how are you going to exist for less than $3,000 a month, right? I don't know if you could live in London for less than 3,000 quid a month. Like it's almost not possible. In China, you could live for months on that kind of money if you wanted to, if you had to. It is possible. You can get around cheap. You can eat for cheap, right? You might be eating a lot of ramen and noodles, but you can do it, whereas other places you can't.
But they still taste great most of the time.
Maybe not after a couple of months every day, but the ceiling was also just as high. You could get as fancy as expensive as you wanted to in any other city as well, because the luxury was there.
Yeah.
Okay. As you alluded to, we are going to move on and talk about consumer brands specifically. What are some of the most popular UK brands in China? Again, which sectors in that area are doing well? And why does the UK brand across sectors resonate with Chinese consumers, in your opinion?
Okay. So,
Two questions there.
Yeah, 2 questions. Hopefully I've got 2 answers. So I think across that, the sort of the consumer space, it obviously got lots of multiple sectors, so
popular
subsectors.
Brands,
So generally, in terms of the sectors where we're seeing growth, it's been around health and wellness, beauty and personal care, fashion, sports and leisure increasingly, and home and lifestyle. And I think those were trends that we were seeing, 4 years ago, but they've really been accelerated trends since, with the lockdowns and things. Lots of new innovative products I've seen in the personal sort of exercise space. I won't list them now. We haven't got time. But I think in health and wellness particularly is quite an interesting area, because I think it's got a really big consumer base that is different in China from most other Western countries, certainly in the UK. The consumer base is very young compared to other parts of the world, I think. the Gen Zs, the millennials, as well as the, what the Chinese call the silver economy, are all purchasing across that category. So some of our main clients from the UK are Holland and Barrett, Vitabiotics, seeing huge growth in China. On the beauty side, we've got Estee Lauder, Creed, Miller Harris, Argentum, Emma Hardy. So it's a market where the big established brands are doing well, and particularly those with really strong brand stories. And in fashion, you've got stories, brands like Burberry, you've got Ted Baker. On the home and lifestyle front, we're working with some of the potteries like Denby, Emma Bridgewater, some of the homeware goods like Vicepring, who do luxury mattresses. And then you've got, other, we touched before on, Jaguar Land Rover, Aston Martin, but also in the bike sector, Brompton Bikes, another great guest for your show. But they've got a great story, and I saw Brompton Bikes in quite a number of stores in China, also in sort of the camping stores. The interest in outdoor, I guess it's glamping in China, but just lots of different shops and different stores. I saw a Brompton bike shop that even got a bar in the middle of it, but there's a lot of fusion in China as well in all of these areas. And do you want me to talk a little bit more about food? And I'll just talk a little bit about some of the food and drink brands. So I've talked a bit about meat, whiskey, and seafood, but we're still selling tea to China from the UK. So we're working with brands like Taylors of Harrogate, Twinings, Whittards of Chelsea. Why do they resonate with the Chinese consumer? I think quality is high on the list. Authenticity. If you've got money to afford imported goods, you can buy pretty much anything. But what's higher value is actually the authenticity and the history. And British brands are really strong in that. And we've got lots of brands who love to tell the story behind their item of clothing or their car model, so that then the consumer feels that they're part of something bigger than just themselves. It brings it back into that experience. I think UK culture's quite popular. As I've said, we've got lots of Chinese students studying in the UK, so they've experienced the UK. Aesthetics, maybe some of the soft power things like The Crown, the Royal Family, Sherlock Holmes, Harry Potter, David Beckham, the Premier League. And we are seeing, in that food space, a lot of attention being paid to some of the royal warrant holder brands like Tiptree. So Wilkin and Sons, they make a particular strawberry jam, which was James Bond's favourite jam. That's not why they're selling in China, but it's just more of the story that they can tell, and it personalises it. And I think that provenance, the craftsmanship, the heritage and the history is a real plus that our brands can bring.
Yeah. Are martinis popular just because of James Bond?
No, I don't think so. I do
not like them at all.
Do you not? I had a great ginger martini in Sichuan Citizen in Shanghai. I recommend it. Next time you're back there.
I can't do vermouth. That's the thing. I just can't. It does not agree with me.
Todd, you're missing out on a whole, I should introduce you to my friend.
I am remarkably uncultured, okay, for those of you listening.
I'm sure not.
I can't. Guinness, it's another one. I'm so sorry. I can't do it.
Don't apologize.
Yeah. It's fine. I do. I feel like I have to apologize.
Know your limits.
Myself
That's the key
and everybody. It is interesting. One of the other things. So this is a little bit off topic, but so two things that I really noticed a lot when I was in China that were surprising to me. One was how many overseas returned Chinese came from the UK. It seemed almost more than America, which I did not expect. And then there is two brands of types of English. And then like the education system, the baccalaureate, if I'm not even probably saying that right, because it sounds French.
Baccalaureate, it is French.
Yeah. But it seems to be the UK standard of English. It's the curriculum of learning English, I would say maybe. I'm probably not describing that properly at all, and I apologize to all the
Not in
English
my
teachers out
experience,
there.
but then I'm old.
Yeah. So these were fascinating. As I got introduced to a lot of English language training platforms and startups, and then the schools, and lo and behold, most of them were studying a British English versus an American English, and so that has been such a huge presence there as well.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, it's are you helping universities
Yeah.
to
In fact,
expand their brand in China as well, because they seem to want to all go to university in the UK,
yeah, absolutely, we are. We have over 50 of our members are leading UK universities.
right?
So yeah, and a range of the universities. Some of them are the Red Brick, the Russell Group universities, and some of them are the more modern universities that focus more on sort of vocational courses and education. But yeah, I think there are more Chinese students studying in the UK than in the US, and I think the
Yeah,
applications are still rising. Obviously, we can't rest on our laurels and assume that's always going to be the case. But I think they recognise that the quality of the education. Obviously, Oxford and Cambridge are famous. That's not saying that other universities in the US or anywhere else aren't equally as famous. But yeah, our education system is well respected.
yeah. It's the prestige.
Yeah,
And that leads me to think a little bit more even about the storytelling.
yeah,
And when you're working with companies, and maybe you're doing kind of those those meetings before you go to educate and get them ready and get them set, understanding
yeah,
that going into a market like China, you won't be able to naturally lean on the history of Aston Martin or Land Rover or what have you. It just doesn't exist, right? They weren't hearing that name and being subjected to the marketing their entire life, and just kind of downloading through osmosis of just living in that area. This is all fresh, so it does highlight the importance of storytelling when you go in,
absolutely.
because they don't naturally carry an idea or a feeling
No,
of prestige about the brands.
yeah, yeah, no, it's really important, and I think those brands that do have that story to tell, it shows when they're talking about their product, because it comes through with a passion, and I think that then builds that trust and that affinity. And if they know that they're, as I was talking about the I don't know if your viewers will know what the royal warrant holders are, but they're basically brands that are supported or endorsed. I don't know if endorsed the correct word, but by the royal family. So if you go to Harrods, it's got a royal warrant crest on it, and so, some of they're the brands that are used by the royal family. So for those, so again,
Yeah.
there's that story, and I guess it adds to the story that the Chinese can then tell themselves, can't they?
So, what is, in reverse, the sentiment of the British business community towards China, including the business leaders in China and in the UK?
I think we're still seeing strong interest in China, which is good for us because we're China specialists.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing many companies keen to get back out to the market, keen to engage if they're already doing business in China. And we have seen increased activity. That's obviously been helped by the reinstatement of some of the flights. We're still not at full capacity yet, but I'm sure they will be adding to their routings. Seeing stories about that all the time. I touched earlier on. I know that a lot of companies are facing broader challenges. Cost of production, just through changes in the global economy. The cost of energy, supply chains can be challenging, and that may mean that companies are not quite in a position to sort of jump on a plane and say, yes, let's go to China now. And perhaps because they haven't been able to get on a plane and go to China. This is a personal view. They've kind of not really been thinking about China. They've sort of put it on parked it for a while and looked at other
Yeah.
markets where they could grow. I mean, businesses need to grow, don't they? So I feel there's a little bit more work that we need to do to keep telling the story about what's going on, where the opportunities are, and that China's still around. China's still here, and for some companies, it's really critical. I mean, I think China's now. I think if you combine China and Hong Kong together, it's our third largest trading partner. for the UK. And I think China, in terms of exports, it's now our second largest market.
If I were to say, and I think you'd agree, and we've started to mention this on the show because we talked to the head of the Australian Chamber, and she was saying the same thing, that some people are still, some business decision makers are still hesitant towards China. They're not sure. There's a COVID hangover, and we think, and we're extremely bullish on China. And if you want to be successful there, now is the time to invest. Now is the time to get out in front of your competition. While others are waffling and scratching their head and taking time to want to try to get it right, fortune favors the bold. And now would be a great time to really start and get ahead and show that, and go, right? Would you believe in that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've been, trying to, I know we don't want to get into politics, and God forbid, we don't want to, but they do impact relations with China, as you know, they can impact relations. And, we have seen, a less than speedy response to getting out and reactivating some of the regular dialogues that used to happen. And that's, often timing, it's often timing. So, but we're keen to support whatever we can in terms of getting those trade dialogues off the ground. We've seen, other senior representatives from other nations meeting up with their Chinese counterparts, even last week. So, we're keen to see that here, because it does support, and it sends a message that, the UK's there as a partner. And in fact, there was a minister out at FHC, and she talked about being there as being important to show that we're a serious long-term partner, and our businesses are there to be serious and are committed as well. And that's what 100%. We need for China. So, but sometimes that's a fine tightrope to walk.
Well, you mentioned that you didn't want to get political, so let's get political. Your work at home with the local government in the UK, what are the messages and what are you trying to deliver, potentially lobby for, or just educate in London to government stakeholders across the UK regarding the trade relationship with China?
Well, interesting that you said in London, because we've been doing quite a bit of work over the last few years looking at how many jobs are dependent on a China relationship across
I apologize
the UK.
for that, by the way. I think it's the fallacy of being North American, is that we believe London is like the epicenter where all decisions are made for all of the UK. So I apologize for that.
Well, kind of. But, we have members of parliament who have constituencies across the UK. And actually,
I know, of course you do.
Some of them have significant business interests within their constituencies that perhaps they've not always been fully aware of. Mm-hmm. And I think, sometimes in the UK you'll hear talk about the Westminster bubble. But we've been doing lots of round tables and working with people to try and bring the balance to the dialogue and say that, some of these companies, X number of employees are because they've got 50% of their exports going to China. If those exports disappear because of, a fallout or whatever, it just brings a sense of realism, I guess. But, China's important, and we've got to keep engaging with China and talking, even about, the challenging things. We're not going to agree. Nobody ever, as individuals, we're not going to agree on things. But if you stop talking, then you don't resolve anything, do you?
Yeah,
so it's really important.
You have to be careful.
And, yeah. So
I just was going to touch on that, because as a country, and this is a pro tip for a lot of brand and decision makers, China can be sensitive and is not going to take lightly being disparaged in any way, not
No.
like any other group would, whether it's LGBTQ or somebody is not producing in a fair trade manner wherever they're sourcing from, or not being as environmentally friendly, or maybe a wingnut CEO goes out in the news and says something awful, and then you'll see a dip of 10% in market share overnight. Everybody is reactive, and China is no different. And
Yeah.
so you do have to be careful, and you should be more thoughtful when you are thinking about somebody that is very important in the value chain of your company.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You do. And I think it's just trying to keep that. The need for a balanced dialogue is key. And everyone needs to have that in their, front of mind, I think.
Yeah, not back of mind, front of mind. Absolutely. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Claire Urry, Chief Commercial Officer at China Britain Business Council, thank you very, very much for coming on the show. We really appreciated your time today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Todd.
Okay. As usual, for everybody listening to us audio only, don't forget to go over and check out our YouTube for YouTube Shorts over there. And for everybody who wants to hear wherever we are audio only, please feel free to go check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, whether it's Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, you name it. But from all of us here at The Negotiation, and for Claire and the CBBC, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.